You touch my drink again, you're fired." The words landed cold, precise, the kind that didn't need to be loud to carry power, and for a split second, the entire room seemed to hold its breath as crystal glasses hovered midair and quiet conversations dissolved into a low, uncertain hum. Because in a place like this, where deals were measured in millions and reputations were currency, no one ignored a man like William Carter when he spoke, especially not a waitress. The rooftop restaurant glowed under soft amber lighting, Manhattan, stretching endlessly beyond the glass walls. Every table dressed in white linen and quiet ambition. And at the center of it all stood Naomi Brooks, her hand still lightly gripping the stem of a wine glass she had just moved, her posture straight, her expression unreadable, as if she had done nothing unusual at all. William's eyes locked onto hers, sharp and assessing. The same eyes that had closed billion-dollar negotiations without hesitation, now narrowing over something as small as a glass of wine. And yet something about the moment didn't feel small, not to him, not to anyone watching. Naomi didn't step back, didn't rush to apologize, didn't offer the rehearsed smile most servers used like armor. She simply stood there, calm in a way that didn't match the tension rising around her. And that calm unsettled him more than defiance ever could. He had seen arrogance, fear, even desperation in rooms like this. But this was different. This was quiet certainty, and it didn't belong to someone in her position. A few seats away, a guest shifted uncomfortably, glancing between them, sensing the shift in atmosphere, but not understanding its cause, while a server in the background froze mid-step, unsure whether to intervene or disappear. Naomi's voice, when it came, was soft, almost lost beneath the distant clink of silverware. "Sir, please don't." And that was all. No explanation, no elaboration. Just a simple request that carried more weight than it should have. And William felt something unfamiliar flicker at the edge of his control. Not fear, not yet, but something close to doubt. He glanced down at the glass now in front of him, the deep red wine catching the light in a way that suddenly felt wrong, though he couldn't say why. And that uncertainty irritated him, because uncertainty was not something he allowed into his world. He leaned back slightly, studying her again, trying to read what she wasn't saying. But Naomi had already stepped away, moving smoothly into the rhythm of the room as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just interrupted the routine of a man who controlled everything around him. Conversation slowly resumed, laughter cautiously returning, but the moment lingered, suspended like a question no one had asked out loud. And William remained still for a second longer than necessary, his fingers resting near the glass, his mind replaying her words, her tone, the deliberate way she had acted without asking permission. And for the first time that night, the man who owned the room wasn't entirely sure he understood what was happening inside it. William Carter did not reach for the glass right away, and that alone was enough to shift the balance of the room in a way no one could quite explain, because men like him did not hesitate. They decided, they acted, they moved forward without looking back. But now his hand hovered just inches from the stem, fingers still, eyes narrowed, replaying a moment that should not have mattered and yet refused to leave him alone. Across the table, a venture partner cleared his throat and forced a polite smile, attempting to pull the evening back on track, talking about projections, about expansion, about numbers that normally would have commanded William's full attention. But tonight the words felt distant, like background noise in a room that had suddenly become too quiet. The wine sat untouched, catching the soft glow of the overhead lights, its surface perfectly still, almost too still. And William's gaze flickered toward the spot where Naomi had stood just moments ago, but she was already gone, moving between tables with practiced ease, invisible again to everyone except him. He exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair, telling himself this was nothing, a server overstepping, a minor disruption, something to be corrected and forgotten. Yet the calm in her eyes lingered in his mind, that quiet certainty that did not match the role she was supposed to play. He had built an empire on reading people, on detecting hesitation, weakness, deception, and what he had seen in her was none of those things. It was something else, something that did not ask for approval. A hand reached across the table, one of the guests laughing lightly as he picked up the original glass Naomi had taken away and set aside just moments before, mistaking it for his own. The motion casual, unthinking, the kind of small human error that happens 100 times in rooms like this without consequence, and no one noticed, not at first. William's attention snapped back, his posture shifting forward slightly, something tightening in his chest, not panic, not yet, but an instinct he had learned never to ignore, the same instinct that had saved him in negotiations, in risks, in moments where everyone else moved too quickly. "Wait," he said, the word coming out sharper than intended, but it was already a second too late, because the man had already taken a sip, already leaned back with a satisfied nod, already returned to the conversation as if nothing had changed. The room continued, laughter rising again, glasses clinking, the skyline stretching endlessly beyond them. But beneath that polished surface, something invisible had begun to shift, something that did not belong to contracts or business deals, something quieter, more dangerous in its uncertainty. William's eyes did not leave the man, watching closely now, measuring every small movement, every breath, every pause, while the echo of Naomi's voice returned, soft but unshakable. "Sir, please don't." And for the first time in a long time, William Carter did not feel in control of the outcome unfolding in front of him. The man laughed softly, setting his glass down with a satisfied breath, completely unaware that every movement he made was now being watched with a level of attention that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with instinct. And William Carter felt time stretch in a way that made each second heavier than the last, his eyes tracking the subtle shift in the man's posture, the slight delay in his response to a question, the way his fingers tapped once against the table before going still again. It was small, almost nothing, the kind of detail most people would miss. But William had built his entire life on noticing what others ignored, and now those instincts were louder than the conversation around him. Across the table, someone made a joke, light and rehearsed, and a ripple of laughter followed. But it did not reach William. It did not reach the man who had just taken that sip either. Because something in his expression had begun to change, not dramatically, not in a way that would alarm anyone immediately, but enough to register as wrong, as off, as a deviation from the smooth rhythm of the evening. William leaned forward slightly, his voice lower now, controlled but firm. "Are you all right?" And the man waved it off with a quick nod, forcing a smile that did not quite settle on his face. "Yeah, just a long day," he said, but the words came a fraction too slow, as if they had to travel further than they should. The room continued to move around them, waiters gliding between tables, the skyline glowing beyond the glass, the illusion of control intact for everyone except the one man who now saw the cracks forming beneath it. William's gaze shifted again, searching the room until he found her, Naomi, near the edge of the floor, her posture unchanged, her expression calm, but her eyes were no longer moving. They were fixed, steady, watching the same man he was, and in that shared focus, something unspoken passed between them, something that did not need words to be understood. She had known. That was the only explanation that made sense. She had seen something before anyone else, something important enough to act without permission, without explanation, without fear of consequence, and now the consequence was unfolding in real time, quietly, almost invisibly, but undeniably. The man shifted in his seat again, adjusting his jacket as if trying to shake off a discomfort he could not name, his smile fading just slightly as he reached for his water instead, his hand not as steady as it had been moments ago, and William felt that same tightening in his chest return, sharper now, more defined, not fear, but certainty, the kind that settles in when all the pieces begin to align. He glanced once more at the untouched glass in front of him, then back at Naomi, and for the first time that night, the man who had questioned her, who had challenged her, who had nearly dismissed her entirely, began to understand that the smallest action in the room had just become the most important one, and that the quiet waitress he had tried to control might be the only person who truly knew what was happening inside a room he thought he owned. The shift was no longer subtle. It was undeniable, the kind of change that could not be hidden behind polite smiles or practiced confidence. And the man who had laughed just minutes ago now sat a little too still, his hand resting against the edge of the table as if grounding himself in something solid, something real, while the conversation around him began to falter, one voice trailing off, another hesitating. The rhythm of the evening breaking in quiet, uncomfortable ways. William Carter did not look away, not even for a second, his focus locked, calculating, every instinct sharpened to a point that cut through the noise of the room. And when the man finally exhaled, slower than before, his expression tightening in a way he could no longer control, William knew with a clarity that left no room for doubt. Something was wrong. Get some air, someone suggested lightly, trying to keep the moment from turning into something heavier, something real, but the suggestion came too late, because the man was already pushing his chair back, the legs scraping softly against the polished floor, his movements careful now, deliberate, as if each step required more effort than it should. A server approached instinctively, concern flickering across his face, but hesitation held him back, because in rooms like this, no one wanted to overstep, no one wanted to assume. And that hesitation hung in the air like a question no one wanted to answer. William stood then, not abruptly, not dramatically, but with a quiet authority that shifted attention immediately, his voice low but firm. Call someone. And this time there was no hesitation, no uncertainty, because the tone alone made it clear that this was no longer a casual evening. This was something else entirely. Across the room, Naomi moved before anyone else fully understood what was happening, her steps quick but controlled, her presence cutting through the confusion with a calm that did not belong to panic. And when she reached the table, she did not look at the man first. She looked at the glass that had been set aside, the one she had moved, the one no one else had questioned, and for a brief moment, her hand hovered above it, not touching, just confirming, as if everything she had already known was now being proven right in front of her. William watched her, really watched her now. Not as a server, not as background, but as the one person in the room who had acted before anyone else even realized there was something to act on. And the realization settled into him with a weight that had nothing to do with business or control, because this was not a negotiation, this was not a strategy, this was something far more human, far more immediate. The man was guided gently away from the table, voices lowering, movements quickening, the illusion of elegance dissolving into quiet, urgency, and still, William remained where he was for a second longer, his eyes shifting from the untouched glass in front of him to Naomi, who now stood just a few feet away, her expression unchanged, steady, composed, as if she had already accepted whatever consequences might follow. And in that moment, as the noise of the room faded into something distant and irrelevant, William Carter understood something he had never had to confront before. That control was not always about power, not always about being the one who spoke the loudest or decided the outcome. Sometimes it belonged to the person who saw what no one else could and acted before anyone else dared, even if no one was watching, even if no one believed them, even if it cost them everything. The room did not return to what it was, not completely, because once something invisible becomes visible, even for a moment, it changes the way everyone breathes, the way they sit, the way they look at one another. And although the music still played softly in the background and the skyline still shimmered beyond the glass, there was a quiet tension now threading through every conversation, a question lingering without words. William Carter remained standing, his gaze no longer drifting, no longer divided, but fixed with purpose as he stepped around the table, closing the distance between himself and Naomi Brooks, each step measured, controlled, yet carrying a weight that had nothing to do with authority and everything to do with understanding. She did not move away when he approached, did not lower her eyes or retreat into the practiced invisibility that had protected her for so long. Instead, she stood exactly where she was, hands steady at her sides, her expression calm but not indifferent, as if she had already accepted whatever came next, whether it was acknowledgement or consequence. William stopped just in front of her, close enough now to see the details he had ignored before, the focus in her eyes, the quiet alertness that had never left her even when she was moving between tables. And for a moment, he said nothing, because for perhaps the first time in that room, he was choosing his words carefully, not to control, but to understand. How did you know? He asked finally. his voice lower than before, stripped of its edge, replaced by something unfamiliar, something closer to respect than command. Naomi did not answer immediately, not out of hesitation, but out of intention, as if she understood that this moment required precision just as much as her earlier action had. And when she spoke, her voice remained soft, steady. "I did not know for sure," she said, "but I saw enough to not ignore it." And that answer settled into the space between them with a quiet gravity that no one else in the room could fully grasp. William's eyes shifted briefly, toward the table, toward the glass that still sat untouched, then back to her. The connection forming piece by piece, not through explanation, but through recognition, because he understood instinct, he understood acting before certainty, he had built his life on it, and now he was standing in front of someone who had done the same, without the safety of power, without the backing of status around them. The room continued in cautious fragments, voices lower now, movements slower, as if everyone was waiting for something to be confirmed, something to be said out loud. But William no longer cared about the room, not in the way he had before, because the center of the moment had shifted, no longer anchored to wealth or influence, but to a single decision made in silence. "You could have been wrong," he said, not as an accusation, but as a statement, a recognition of the risk she had taken. And Naomi met his gaze without flinching. "Yes," she replied simply, and there was no apology in it, no attempt to soften the truth, only honesty, clear and unshaken. And in that honesty, William Carter felt something shift within himself, something subtle but irreversible, because for the first time that night, he was not the one defining the moment, he was the one learning from it, and the quiet waitress he had nearly dismissed had just become the one person in the room whose judgment he could not ignore. The silence between them did not feel empty. It felt heavy, like something settling into place that could not be undone, and for a moment, neither William Carter nor Naomi Brooks moved, as if both understood that whatever came next would define more than just this night. Across the room, a manager appeared, his expression tight with concern, whispering quickly to another staff member while glancing toward the table where the untouched glass still sat, now no longer just an object, but evidence of something no one wanted to name out loud. And the quiet urgency that had replaced the evening's elegance continued to spread, subtle but undeniable. William's attention shifted briefly as a suited security advisor approached him, speaking in a low voice about precaution, about stepping away, about letting professionals handle the situation, but William barely acknowledged him, his focus returning to Naomi with a clarity that dismissed everything else as secondary. "Stay here," the advisor insisted gently. But William shook his head once, a small motion, controlled but final, because for the first time that night, he was not following protocol, he was following instinct, the same instinct that had made him pause, that had made him listen, that had made him see. Naomi noticed the exchange but did not react, her posture unchanged, her calm still intact. Yet beneath that calm was something else now, something quieter, something that carried the weight of what had just happened. Because she knew the line she had crossed, knew the risk she had taken, and knew that in rooms like this, stepping out of place often came with consequences no one talked about. "You should step back," the manager said to her, his tone careful but firm, trying to restore order, to return roles to where they belonged. But Naomi did not immediately move, her eyes flickering once toward William, not seeking permission, but acknowledging the moment they had shared, the understanding that had formed. Without words, William caught that glance, and something in it made his decision for him before he even spoke. "She stays," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying through the tension like a line drawn in stone, and the manager hesitated, caught between protocol and authority, before stepping back with a nod he could not refuse. The room shifted again, not loudly, not dramatically, but in the subtle way power rearranges itself when it recognizes something new. And for the first time that night, Naomi was no longer invisible, not to the staff, not to the guests, and certainly not to William Carter. He turned slightly, looking once more at the glass, then at the path the other man had been guided down moments before, and then back to Naomi, the sequence of events aligning fully now in his mind, not as coincidence, but as cause and effect, as action and consequence. as a decision made in silence that had changed the outcome of everything. "You did not hesitate," he said, more to himself than to her. But Naomi answered anyway, her voice steady. "Hesitation costs more than mistakes sometimes." And the simplicity of that statement landed with a weight far beyond its words, because it reflected something William understood deeply, something he had lived by, yet never expected to hear from someone. The world had taught him not to notice. And in that moment, as the city lights flickered beyond the glass and the quiet tension of the room settled into a new kind of awareness, William Carter realized that the most decisive move of the night had not been made by the man with the power, but by the one who had nothing to gain and everything to lose, and still chose to act. The air in the room no longer belonged to conversation. It belonged to realization, the kind that settles slowly but permanently. And as quiet voices continued in careful fragments, something else began to spread, something far more powerful than fear or confusion. It was awareness, the recognition that what had just happened was not ordinary, not accidental, and certainly not something that could be ignored. William Carter turned slightly as one of his senior partners approached, his tone lowered but urgent, asking if they should end the evening early, suggesting discretion, suggesting distance. The kind of calculated retreat that powerful men often relied on when uncertainty entered the room. But William did not answer right away, because for once, he was not thinking about optics, not about perception, but about truth. His gaze shifted again toward Naomi Brooks, who had already resumed her position near the edge of the floor, not seeking attention, not waiting for acknowledgement, simply returning to the role the room expected her to play. And yet that return only made her stand out more, because now everyone had seen what she was capable of, even if they did not fully understand it. A quiet murmur passed between two guests nearby, one whispering something about coincidence, the other shaking his head, unconvinced, because even in a room built on confidence, doubt had begun to take root. William stepped forward again, not toward the table this time, but toward Naomi, his movement drawing subtle attention. Conversations dipping just enough for people to notice, because when a man like him moved with purpose, people watched. Naomi looked up as he approached, her expression unchanged, but there was a quiet alertness in her eyes, not defensive, not expectant, simply aware, and that awareness met his own in a way that felt almost equal, even if the room around them still insisted they were not. "You saw something specific," William said, his voice steady, not questioning now, but confirming, and Naomi held his gaze for a moment before answering. A hand that should not have been there, and a moment that did not belong. Her words simple, but precise, each one chosen carefully, and William nodded slightly, because that was enough, more than enough. It aligned perfectly with the pattern his mind had already built. He glanced briefly toward the table again, then back to her. The pieces now fully connected, not just what had happened, but how close it had come to going unnoticed, how easily it could have been dismissed as nothing, and how different the outcome would have been if she had chosen silence instead of action. Most people would have ignored it, he said, not as praise, but as fact, and Naomi's response came just as steady. Most people are taught to, and that sentence landed deeper than anything else she had said, because it did not just explain her action, it explained the room, the system, the invisible rules that had nearly allowed something dangerous to pass unnoticed. William exhaled slowly, his perspective shifting in a way that had nothing to do with business or control, but everything to do with clarity, because for the first time, he was not just seeing what had happened, he was seeing what usually did not happen, what was usually missed, overlooked, dismissed, and the cost of that blindness around them. The room continued to recalibrate, conversations quieter, movements more deliberate, as if everyone was adjusting to a reality they had not expected to confront. And in the center of it all, the balance of power had changed in a way no one could reverse, because it was no longer defined by wealth or position, but by awareness, by courage, by the willingness to act when no one else would. And William Carter, a man who had always believed he understood power, was now standing face to face with a version of it he had never truly recognized until this moment. The room no longer pretended to be what it had been at the start of the night. The polished ease replaced by something quieter, something more honest, And as the staff moved with renewed attention and guests lowered their voices into careful tones, the illusion of control that had once defined the evening dissolved into something far less certain. William Carter stood still for a moment, taking in the subtle shift around him. The way people now looked at the table, at the glass, at Naomi Brooks. No longer as background, but as a presence they could not ignore. And in that shift, he saw something he had overlooked for years, the silent hierarchy that determined who was heard and who was dismissed, and how easily it could fail when it mattered most. A senior manager approached again, this time more composed, informing William that the situation had been handled, that the guest was stable, that everything would be kept discreet. The kind of reassurance designed to restore normalcy, but William simply nodded, not because he accepted it, but because he understood that normal was no longer relevant. His attention returned to Naomi, who had resumed carrying a tray, moving between tables with the same steady rhythm as before, yet nothing about her presence was the same now, not to him, not to anyone who had witnessed what had unfolded, and still she did not slow down, did not wait for acknowledgement. As if the moment had never been about being seen at all, William stepped forward. Once more, closing the distance between them with a quiet determination that drew the attention of those nearby. Conversations softening again, eyes shifting subtly, because even without raised voices, something important was about to be said. Naomi stopped when she reached him, her posture composed, her expression calm, but her eyes carried the same clarity that had guided her earlier. And William met that gaze without hesitation, without the distance he had once placed between them. "You understood the risk," he said, not as a question, but as recognition, and Naomi nodded slightly, her voice steady. "Yes, sir." And there was no dramatics in it, no attempt to elevate what she had done, only the simple acknowledgement of a choice made and accepted. William studied her for a moment longer, then glanced briefly around the room, taking in the subtle attention, the quiet shift in perception, before returning his focus to her, and when he spoke again, his voice carried not authority, but intention. "From now on, you do not stand at the edge of the room," and the words landed with a weight that extended beyond their simplicity, because they did not just change her position, they challenged the structure of everything around them. Naomi did not react immediately, not with surprise, not with relief, but with a measured stillness, as if she understood that words alone did not change reality, that what mattered was what followed, and William seemed to understand that too, because he did not look away, did not soften the moment. He held it, letting it settle into the space between them, around them. The room adjusted once more, not loudly, not dramatically, but in the quiet way perception shifts when truth becomes visible, and for the first time that night, the most important presence in the room was not defined by wealth or status, but by the quiet courage of someone who had acted when no one else would, and the recognition of someone who had finally learned to see it. The night did not end with applause. It did not return to laughter, and it did not pretend that nothing had happened. Instead, it settled into something quieter, something more honest, as the last glasses were cleared and the skyline outside stretched into a deep midnight glow, reflecting a city that never stopped moving even when the people inside it were forced to pause. William Carter stood near the edge of the room now, no longer at the center, no longer surrounded by voices trying to impress him, but alone in a way that felt different, not isolated, but aware, his gaze following Naomi Brooks as she moved through the final motions of her shift, steady, composed, unchanged in the way she carried herself despite everything that had unfolded. She did not linger near him, did not wait for acknowledgement, did not seek recognition for what she had done, because for her, the moment had never been about being seen, it had been about doing what needed to be done. And that distinction settled into William's mind with a weight he could not ignore. He had spent years believing that power was measured by control, by influence, by the ability to shape outcomes before they unfolded. But tonight had shown him something different, something quieter, something that did not demand attention but commanded it anyway. As Naomi reached the service station, setting down her tray with the same care she had shown all evening, William took a step forward, closing the distance one last time, not with urgency, not with authority, but with intention, and when she turned to face him, there was no surprise in her expression, only that same steady awareness that had guided her from the beginning. "You did not do that for recognition," he said, his voice calm, no longer testing, no longer questioning, but acknowledging, and Naomi gave a small shake of her head, her answer simple. "No, sir." And that was all. No explanation, no elaboration, because none was needed. William nodded once, absorbing the truth of it, then reached into his jacket, not for a business card, not for a gesture of transaction, but for something far more deliberate, a quiet decision forming into action as he placed a simple card on the counter beside her, not pushed forward, not offered with expectation, just set there, allowing her the choice to accept it or not. "If you ever decide you want to be seen differently," he said, his tone measured, "you will have that option." And then he stepped back, not waiting for an answer, not needing one, because for the first time, he understood that not every decision required immediate closure. Some simply needed to exist, to be recognized, to be respected. Naomi looked down at the card for a moment, her expression unchanged, but her eyes reflecting something deeper, something thoughtful, before she placed her hand lightly over it, not claiming it yet, just acknowledging it, the same way she had acknowledged the moment earlier, with care, with intention, with clarity. And as William Carter turned and walked toward the exit, the city lights reflecting against the glass behind him, he understood something that no deal, no negotiation, no victory had ever taught him. That power was not proven in the moments where you were in control, but in the moments where you chose to listen, to learn, to see someone the world had taught you to overlook. And that night, in a room built on status and silence, the quietest person had been the one who changed everything, not by speaking louder, but by refusing to stay invisible when it mattered most.